we left off somewhere in verse 7, and we're going to pick it up in verse 7, but let's reread 4 through 10, as that's the chunk that we're dealing with here. 2 Peter 2:4 begins, "For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but sent them to hell," which we talked about as Tartarus, "putting them in chains of darkness to be held for judgment. If he did not spare the ancient world when he brought the flood on its ungodly people, but protected Noah, a preacher of righteousness, and 7 others. If he condemned the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah by burning them to ashes and made them an example of what is going to happen to the ungodly. And if he rescued Lot, a righteous man, who was distressed by the depraved conduct of the lawless, for that righteous man living among them day after day was tormented in his righteous soul by the lawless deeds he saw and heard." All of that is the protasis. Here's the apodosis. "If this is so, then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from trials, and to hold the unrighteous for punishment on the day of judgment. This is especially true of those who follow corrupt desires of the flesh and despise authority." So Peter's gone through and he's given us typological examples. The rebellious angels were held for judgment. The ancient world was wiped out, and Sodom and Gomorrah were wiped out. But there's also examples of typological salvation, because Noah and his family, 7 others, 3 sons, 3 daughters, 3 daughter-in-laws, and his wife, 7, plus Noah's 8. And the rescue of Lot and his family, his daughters were rescued, but his wife turned back, meaning she tried to return to Sodom and got caught up in its destruction. So all of that being the case, these past examples of judgment and salvation point to the fact that God does in fact judge sin, and he has done it in the past. He will do it in the future. And so Peter's looking forward to the coming judgment through Jesus that the heretical apostates we talked about have been denying. And we kind of ended about right here in verse 7. We talked a little bit about this, but I'm going to recap a couple of slides here from last week. Peter places stress on Lot's culture that he's embedded himself within. So verse 7, this part says, "Distressed by the depraved conduct of the lawless." Now, I argued a little bit here last week that distressed, as the NIV translates, might be better oppressed, who was oppressed by the depraved conduct of the lawless, because the passage that Peter is drawing from for this part of Lot's story is Genesis 19 with Sodom and Gomorrah. There you don't see Lot being as much mentally distressed, as he'll talk about in verse 8, but socially oppressed. The men come to his house, they bang on the door, they demand his guest because he's not one of them. They think that they can make demands of him socially. And so oppressed is, I think, a better idea. The reason they get distressed is largely because of verse 8, but I think verse 7 and verse 8 are saying 2 different things that complement one another. And this part is, he was a righteous man living in a lawless place, and the lawless people of that place oppressed him in this part of the story that Peter's drawing from. So we could talk about the grammar, the etymology and stuff. It works to translate it distressed. You can do that, but it makes more sense in light of how this word is more commonly used to see this line as actually being oppressed rather than distressed. So verse 8 is the verse that puts the emphasis, I think, on the mental stress that Lot was under, surrounded by day-to-day wickedness. Verse 7, however, is still emphasizing the oppression he faced at the hands of the wicked people with Sodom. So when he says the depraved conduct of the lawless here, he's likely referencing how Lot was treated by the men of Sodom. So the depraved conduct of the lawless is likely an oppressive idea of how he was treated by the men of Sodom. Plus, it links back to verse 2, where the heretical apostates are leading many to follow their own depraved conduct. And the emphasis is on the bad actions, the bad behavior of the people doing the thing, not on Lot's perception of it, which is verse 8. It's on the behavior of the people. That's what Peter is tapping into. So, again, as I said last week, he's indirectly connecting the heretical apostates to be like the men of Sodom. It's a typological connection of saying, you're like them. So God destroyed them and wiped them out. What do you think he's going to do to you is the implied idea. And he's drawing a linguistic connection there so that that idea is implied. He could be going so far as to suggest that they're bold and aggressive like the men of Sodom. That's speculation, but not a bad one, judging by how he'll later describe the heretical apostates, but we don't know that for certain. Regardless, their undeniable lawless living in Sodom and Gomorrah and in the heretical apostates in the churches and in our culture today, it always descends into violence very, very quickly. When you give up moral structure and moral laws, it turns to violence on a dime so quickly. And there's lots of different forms of violence. And of course, here Peter's speaking of physical violence, but this is something coming up in our culture. Our culture has abandoned responsibility towards other people socially for several generations now. In the 1960s, where the free love movement and no-fault divorce are essentially instituted kind of socially together, back to back, the idea that you should have actual moral responsibility to other people kind of just gets left by the wayside. And what happens is people start abandoning their relationships, their moral responsibilities to other people, and they start living only for themselves. And then when it becomes an impossibility to fully escape your moral responsibility to the society around you, you start physically attacking the society around you to try to impose your own moral ideas, which is lawlessness. You should be free to do whatever you want whenever you want, becomes the common denominator. If you have no moral responsibility to anyone, why shouldn't you be free to do what you want when you want? That's hedonism, that's paganism, that's a very bad set of qualities to possess in our character. It's a lack of character possessed by so many people. And it very quickly descends into, why shouldn't I just attack other people for not giving me what I want or for stopping me from having what I want? I was repulsed this week by a video that I saw of some of the kids in TPUSA setting up, Charlie Kirk's organization, setting up a place on campus to go on trying to have conversation with somebody. And this woman walks by and she said a couple of other things, but she says, just watch your necks, and walks away, because Charlie Kirk was shot in the neck. And she said it in a threatening way. It wasn't like, hey, just be careful. That wasn't it. If you've seen the clip, she's like said it in a threatening tone. Okay, well, just watch your necks. And then she turns and walks away. As in, hey, I don't like you, and I have reserved the right to shoot you in the neck and kill you the way Charlie Kirk was killed, if I so please. I mean, threatening violence is only one step away from actually committing the violence. If you've studied any psychopaths, you always know that it's stuff like hurting animals that builds towards hurting people. Threatening builds towards actions being taken. And it's just not good. So we are a society that's becoming very, very Sodom-like in many different aspects of the word, but one of it is that we will use violence to pursue our own lawless ends. So how is the Christian actually supposed to respond to this? That's kind of the question we want. Well, our trust in God should go far enough to actually believe that as God rescued Lot from these people's sinful, aggressive attacks against him, that God would actually rescue us if we will remain faithful to him and not respond with violent aggression. And there is a good form of violence and a good form of aggression, because what Peter is referencing here about Jesus is that his return is going to be a violent and aggressive destruction of the ungodly. It's not like it doesn't exist in a good way. Batman is an example of turning violence into a good thing because of who he's going after and who's attacked, and we call him a hero. But let's not be ignorant here. Let's not be overly simplistic. He uses violence against the worst perpetrators. And there is such a good thing as that. However, that doesn't mean that God is calling us to do that. He's calling us to patiently endure the attacks of them and let him take vengeance when he wills. That's kind of the flaw of Batman. Batman takes his own vengeance against the lawlessness of Gotham City. But we're supposed to leave room for the vengeance of God. God says in the book of Jeremiah, vengeance is mine. I will repay those who have done wrong. And we just kind of have to patiently endure. But in that patience is part of the belief that when God actually does judge the wicked and the lawless, the way that he does Sodom and Gomorrah, he will rescue the righteous from them. So here, he rescues Lot. It's parallel to how he delivered Noah in verse 5. And it prefigures God's deliverance of the godly from judgment in verse 9. So he's using similar language to make complementary points to build this portrait of saying it's not just judgment that's coming, it's also salvation. So he doesn't just look at the judgment typologically, he actually looks at God's salvific rescue, which is not something that Jude does. Jude just cares about the judgment. He doesn't care about any salvific notion towards people in the society. So Gene Green says, despite the dreadful situation Lot faced in Sodom, God rescued him from the evil oppressors of his day. So too, the believer can hope for divine aid in this conflict with heretics. Divine aid doesn't necessarily mean survival, but the example of Noah and Lot is to emphasize survival when the ungodly are taken down, and they will be taken down. So the American Christian can receive rescue from the oppressive powers that animate our culture in aggressive, if not downright violent ways, which stem from fundamentally defying God, defying God and denying God his reverent honor that's due him and due his Messiah and Lord over the heavens and the earth. But see, this rescue, it's very important to emphasize, this rescue is contingent on obedient loyalty, allegiance. You actually have to go on obeying to receive the rescue. A lot of people think they're just going to get it willy-nilly, and that's just not going to happen. They have no connection to God. They have no real loyalty to God. Even if they can be in church week after week, day after day, or anything like that. And it doesn't mean that God's necessarily going to rescue them. He rescues those who do righteousness, which, as we talked about with Lot, meant that he, like Abraham, took care of the strangers that he had opportunity to care for. He did not know that the angels were angelic, which is what, this picture back here is portraying.
That's a cool picture.
Thank you. I Googled it. Angels don't actually have wings. Only cherubim/seraphim do. So this is just telling the person looking at the painting that these are angels between the white clothing and the wings. You obviously know that. But when Lot's looking at angels, he has no idea that they're angels because they look and act just like men. And he doesn't know they're anything different than normal people in need of his help when they enter the city of Sodom until they strike the men of Sodom blind. He just doesn't know that.
I always thought angels had wings.
No. Only one class of angelic beings called cherubim have wings. Yeah. It's because over the centuries, they're always portrayed as having wings so that they can visually distinct humans from angels. Because of that, we just naturally assume. And we do not understand in the Old Testament the language used to describe them and not used to describe them. Angels are never described as having wings. Only cherubim. Okay, so verse 8 says, "For that righteous man," meaning Lot, "living among them day after day, was tormented in his righteous soul by the lawless deeds he saw and heard." So now, verse 8 is talking about the mental distress that Lot and his family lived under, and it's now expanded. So Peter is now emphasizing the mental state of Lot regarding the surrounding culture because he wants to encourage believers in the congregation that their state of mind and our state of mind today should be, it's not only going to happen, we're not only going to be distressed by the society around us, it should actually become the normal thing. It shouldn't surprise us as Christians that people who have no loyalty to Christ disobey his laws, disobey his instructions and his teachings, sin with reckless abandon, try and manipulate, control, and rule the world in a way that benefits them at the expense of anybody else. That's the norm of people that don't know and fear God. So it should not only surprise us, it should distress us. We ought to be in great mental pains for our surrounding culture's coming judgment. We want to see them delivered from it, but we know they're still going to face it. And that, let's say, mental distress, cognitive distress, it's a lot to carry around in our heads. Peter's congregations are dealing with this because of the heretical apostates. We deal with this because if you really do love the people around you and you know that they're doing wrong, it actively does mentally distress us. It hurts us. And it should, because that's God's perspective. That's God's heart within us. It is a concern for the well-being of others. It is love expressing itself, trying to say, please stop doing these terrible things because the consequences are going to be worse than you can imagine. And then people saying, no, I don't want to stop doing my terrible things. It hurts. It should. Peter is feeling this for his congregations because, in part, they've been led astray by the heretical apostates. For the modern Christian, it might mean those tempted to choose the easy paths and accept socially acceptable ideas that fly in the face of God's kingly will should distress us. It really, really should bother us how easy it is in our Christian culture today to defy God and just create churches that take their philosophies and if you can even call it theology, from the world around us, that they will accept all the wrong things so long as it is socially acceptable as opposed to acceptable by God. We will always be the remnant in our society. We will always be the voice calling out in the wilderness to prepare the way for God and His coming. And it should always bother us. We should never become so callous that it stops bothering us, that the world around us is going to hell in a handbasket, that God's judgment is going to come and destroy them. It's the thing that motivates us, or ought to motivate us at least, to keep calling out and seeking their rescue. When it stops bothering us and we give up on them, I don't think we're expressing God's love anymore. And the reason that I emphasize this stuff so much is usually because I actually care about people, but people don't get a say in what God is and is not going to judge. I don't give a crap what society actually thinks is right and wrong. You shouldn't care what I think is right and wrong. We should all care what God says is right and wrong, because that's the standard He's going to hold us all to. And it's that standard that I try and preach, which means I have to talk about judgment so much of the time, as Peter is doing here. And when he says Lot was living among them day after day, Lot was not outside of Sodom looking in. He was a contributing member of that society for years. First off, he does seem, when he separates from Abraham in, Genesis 13? I mean, it's really early on. Maybe even being the end of chapter 12. I don't even remember. He goes and he lives kind of in the farmlands surrounding these cities. And then by the time 19 comes along and years have passed, he's actually living within the city. So it's comparable to saying that that's the state of the Christians in the Roman society of Peter's day. It's the state of modern Christians today, living in America. America is not a Christian nation. It never has been. It was founded on Christian ideas. And yes, there were plenty of Christians in the founding fathers, but I think actually more of them were just deists who believed in a God rather than Christians who had any loyalty to that God. But they still founded something that can only, who was it? John Adams? I think it was in the Federalist paper, so it may not have been John Adams, it may have been Alexander Hamilton, who makes the point, and it may not have been the Federalist papers, but who said, in order for and I'm paraphrasing here, in order for this government to succeed, you need two things, morality and education. 20th century Christianity and in 20th century American culture has abandoned education. We do not have a good education system. And because of that came first. We abandoned education and we later abandoned morality. If you're going to recover morality, you're going to have to recover good education. And that is a reason why I take Christian learning of the scriptures so seriously. And I actually teach things that are not commonly taught in churches. It is a pathway to rediscovering what God says, His truth, and walking in His morality. Our Christian culture in America today is weak, if it exists at all in plenty of places, because we compromise with the society around us, and we give up God's standards to pursue comfort and peace with the world. John says about that, anybody who's makes friends with the world has enmity with God, because the world and God are at war. And Sodom represents people who are waging war against God in Peter's mind in his letter. For him, that means the heretical apostates and people that join them. Does that include you? Hopefully not. So Lot himself is used as a type of the eschatological believer to come. The Old Testament believer who in the dawning of the Messianic New Testament age. Lot is a great example or a type of somebody who's in the world but not of it, as the phrasing goes. This is a biblical teaching, but you will not find this phrase in the Bible. It's a common 20th century American way to describe it, and it's fine. It's a good way to describe it. It's a bit of an oversimplification, the way that people just kind of say, well, we're supposed to be in the world but not of it. And then they can't parse out what that means, but the phrase is still true. It's just people need to understand it better. It means that you should be in the world, acting like Lot, oppressed and distressed by the people around you until the time that God actually rescues you from their destruction. How many of us take Christianity and being in the world and not of it that way? That deliberately intense. Now, Lot was tormented in his righteous soul. The Greek, Psychen Dakayan. I always read that letter wrong in Greek because it reminds me of a Hebrew letter. And anyways, the NIV word for soul, it's the Greek word for mind, where we get psyche, the mind from this Greek word. I don't really like the NIV translating it soul, because the whole point of the word is to communicate the whole self. It's not merely a part. In Greek and in Hebrew, the mind, the heart, these are words that represent the entire being, including the body and the way the body works, how people function in their behavior, in their embodied life. It's a summary idea for the whole self. We've divorced it into this 2 or 3 part person where you have the body, the soul, and the spirit, and that is not the way the New Testament language works. It's not the way the Old Testament language works. They share this in common, but over the centuries, we've broken this word up. He was a righteous person, and his entire righteous being was tormented, mentally distressed, yes, but it would, come out in physical ways. It's that powerful. So verse 7 highlights the physical oppression against Lot. Verse 8 seems to highlight the internal battle that he faced. But that internal battle took external forms in that he stood between the men of Sodom and his guest. He went out and he actually said, you cannot have my guest. What else do you want? But I'm not giving you my guest. They're under my roof of protection. And if you're really a righteous soul, you stand between the godly and the godless, like Lot did. Now, this phrase, the lawless deeds he saw and heard, you could render that without a law, anti-law language, because it gives the readers the notions of the heretical apostates are closer to the antinomian apostates of Jude, if you're just taking it strictly on the linguistic stuff. If you're saying without a law and anti-law, it makes it sound like the heretical apostates and the antinomian apostates of Jude are the same group. That's not really how Peter's using the phrase. Lawless deeds is really just a way of saying sin and iniquity in general. It's a synonym for those ideas. Lawless deeds doesn't need to make these apostates the same as Jude's apostates. Gene Green says he's not specifically thinking about the way the Sodomites want to have sex with the visitors, but rather refers to something that was happening all the time. The picture is not simply of an individual act of specific sins, but a way of life that produces such actions. The people of Sodom did not just act corruptly on occasion. Their character was marked by lawlessness, by sin, by iniquity. Insofar as they prefigure the heretics, Peter highlights the depth of their moral decay. And by that, he's saying, and you heretical apostates that I'm denouncing in this epistle, you have terrible character. You're full of greed. You're full of lawlessness. Sin and iniquity is your primary embrace here. You don't embrace God because you haven't embraced His gospel and His teachings here. The language of saw and heard takes the reader back to chapter 1, where the similar language is employed to argue for the apostles being eyewitnesses who saw and heard the glory of the Lord on the mountain. But it's basic language used for testimony for or against something in legal rulings. So here Lot, and by extension the Christian he becomes a type of, acts as a witness, seeing and hearing the things that will ultimately condemn the lawless society in which he and we are embedded in. The day is going to come where God finally judges evil once and for all. On that day, we're going to be called as witnesses. What was going on in Gladstone in 2023? What year? 2025. What year are we in? I don't know why I suddenly flashed back to 2023. So when God says, all right, we're going to talk about Gladstone's sins in the year of 2025, we should all be called as witnesses to say, this is what I saw, this is the way that I lived, this is the way what I saw living. And God says, okay, based on all your testimonies and His own written documents, because He's got the records, he goes through the formalities and says, all the witnesses actually rise up and condemn you. And boom, condemnation. That's how it works. So judgment is not only coming, but the Christian will act as witness in God's court to show the guilt and bring just condemnation by God on the lawless. So this idea that, judge not lest ye be judged, actually has a contextual point when Jesus says that in the Sermon on the Mount. Even in places like where he says that, he turns around and he says hang on, I'm going to read this because I want to get this accurate. So in Matthew, where that statement always gets brought up in the Sermon on the Mount. Judge not, do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged, and in the same measure you use, it will be measured against you. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your own eye, when all the time you have a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. This is the statement that counterbalances that in verse 6. Do not give dogs what is sacred. Do not throw your pearls to pigs. If you do, they may trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. So that statement is designed to counterbalance the idea of don't judge. Because when he's saying don't judge others, he means something along the lines of don't judge people until you've taken a good, long, hard look at yourself, right? That's kind of the point of this. But when you have judged yourself and you've taken stock of who you are, the God that you followed, and you get your life in order, the natural thing to do is to turn around and judge other people, in the sense that you know you did wrong and you put yourself right, but because you know you did wrong and started the process of getting it right, you know that when other people are doing the wrong that you were doing, that's what judging is. And when he says don't throw your pearls to swine, don't give them to dogs and stuff, I say don't throw out judgment entirely. If you take your pearls and you just let people manipulate you and control you into not judging their evil and their sin, they will turn around and trample you. If you don't employ some level of judgment, and it does not have to be condemnatory judgment the way Peter is implying here for the heretical apostates, for these past people, and at the parousia of Jesus. As you're going through your life and trying to help people, you don't have to condemn them for their actions. That day hasn't come yet, but you do actually have to employ judgment, because otherwise you're taking the pearl of God's wisdom and the right way to live, and you're saying, it's not that important, and you're just letting the dogs and the pigs trample over it. Language of saying the pagans, the people that don't want anything of God except control and power over him. And it's just not good. And I think that's a lot of what Christianity does. We bow to the whims of the pagan people around us so that we don't hold God's moral standard up. And in so doing, they turn around, they trample us. And then when it comes along that we actually try and come back and maybe do some level of saying, okay, you're going too far. Well, the only reason they went so far is because we gave them permission to cross the line to begin with. And now we're trying to draw a line. Now they're going to turn and attack us. Of course that's going to happen. The men of Sodom tried to draw a line with Lot, who's saying, look, the line here today is you cannot have my guests. And they said, get out of our way or we'll kill you. And it took supernatural intervention in the form of these angels to actually save Lot from the physical attacks of the people. We might just have to actually draw the line, accept the ire, the hatred, and maybe even the physical attacks of the ungodly people in our surrounding societies to take a stand for God. And just like Jesus, you may actually just have to die for your convictions and what you believe in, and let God bring resurrection about. It's all part of what God is going to do in the future, which is why in verse 9, we finally get to the apodosis of all this. If God judged and saved all these past examples, then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from trials, to hold the unrighteous for punishment on the day of judgment. So we're finally back to the whole point he's making. So given that verses 4 through 8 are all true from the past, the future implications to come are also true. God can and will rescue his faithful people from the judgment the world will face for their own ongoing rebellion. The Lord knows how to rescue. So the knowing here is not about merely understanding how to get something done. It's actually about the declaration that God will actually do the thing. God doesn't just know how to do things. The things he knows to do, he does. Here it's rescuing the righteous. So he's going to save the righteous. He's going to judge the wicked. And there's all sorts of other New Testament ideas about this scattered throughout there. And it's entirely based off Old Testament prophetic text. He will rescue the godly from trials. Rescue is the same word as verse 7, referring to Lot. So what God did for Lot, his last example, he knows how to do for Christians today. So he's strengthening his typological deliverance idea. It's also language, I should have left my Bible open because I was just in Matthew 6 talking about the other one in the Lord's Prayer. But it's the passage that said, Lord, lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil, from the evil one. Same rescue, deliverance word used there as here. So lots of Jesus teachings, Jesus language in the Sermon on the Mount used here to make this. But the emphasis is on those who fulfill their obligations. Rescuing the godly. The godly are those who fulfill their obligations before both God and society. How do you fulfill your obligations to God? Fulfill your obligations to the society around you. God has not created man to be an island. Our lives are intertwined with the lives of people around us. And we are expected as God's image bearers representing him in this world to look at the needs of those around us and meet those needs. Lot was righteous. Lot was godly because he fulfilled obligations to the stranger passing through Sodom. He stayed out at the gates of the city looking for the strangers coming in, traveling, and needing a place to stay. Because they didn't have hotels. They didn't have inns. An inn, even in the New Testament day, was staying at somebody's house. They didn't have inns and motels and hotels the way that we describe them today. You trusted and relied on the people in the city to provide shelter, even if only for one night, one meal, And that was fulfilling your righteous obligations to other people. It's not merely making the correct declarations. It's those who actually live according to the truth. How can you live according to the truth if you don't know what the truth is? How can you live according to the truth if you don't think there is such thing as truth? You can't believe in truth and not do what it says, not follow the teachings of truth and be righteous. You can't follow truth if you don't believe truth exists. This is the New Testament language. The truth is the God of the Bible is the one true God. He is the God of gods, the most highest power in the universe that set up all the powers governing the universe. He lifted his son up, not just from the grave, but to sit next to him, beside him, wielding all of his power in the universe to bring about truth and justice throughout heaven and earth. That is going to happen. And the people that are going to get in on the good benefits of those are those who follow the way of truth. It's language already used in verse 2 of the people who are following the heretics' wicked ways. It recalls the responsibility placed on believers in the homily, the virtues that Peter is pointing out in verses, 3 through 7? Add to your faith knowledge, to knowledge virtue, to virtue self-control, to self-control godliness, to godliness mutual affection, and to mutual affection brotherly love is mutual affection, and to mutual affection love. I might have missed one. I don't really remember, but that's the general gist of it. If you're going to follow the way of truth, you're going to act out your genuine beliefs. The homily has already keyed you in on what it means to be godly and the type of character it takes to actually be rescued from trials. Trials could refer to either temptations to sin, which is sometimes how it gets translated in the Bible, or a trial that's meant to unveil one's character, which is how James largely uses it, and I'm most familiar with that, but he's not the only one. You have to depend on the context to understand it because it's the same Greek word, perasmos. It can be translated temptation or trial. And the point that James is making out in chapters 2, I think is at the end of chapter 1, but he does this several times because he uses the word over and over again as a catchword. He says, let no one think that God is tempting me when I'm being tempted. In James 1, he says, because God will send a trial your way, and Satan will try and use the trial to tempt you. And that's not God tempting you. You're being tempted by your own desires now. And the difference between a trial and a temptation is based on the good of the person bringing it to you. God is testing you to unveil your character, help you develop and form greater character. Satan will use that same test, turn it into a temptation to try and destroy your character, getting us to sin. And he's often very victorious behind that. So, here, the way that Peter's using it is most definitely the latter. It's a trial meant to unveil one's character. Whether Peter's referring to specific trials, like the existence of the heretical apostates in the congregation, or just general trials faced by all Christians, or the eschatological judgment to come, we don't really know. It's not very clear. What is clear is the promise of God, God can and will deliver his people from such trials so long as his people remain devoted towards him. The way that I've talked about on previous sermons in the month of September, where James talks about the devout. We should remain devoted. We should not doubt. Doubting is saying if a better opportunity comes along in James 1, I'll just go chase after that opportunity and not really stay committed to God. Peter's language taps into that same idea. He rescues the godly, those who seek to fulfill their social obligations from what? From trials, from being dejected by God. He rescues those who remain devout. And so here the implication is Lot was very devout, so should you. To hold the unrighteous, for punishment on the day of judgment. So this is the opposite of the devout. The unrighteous are those who flout divine and sometimes human laws and social operations. They're those who do wrong with total abandon. They're not just those who struggle with doing wrong and want to do right. They're people who are saying, I don't really care what's right or wrong. I'm just going to do whatever I want. It adapts language from the last part of Jude 6 and about the bound angels, where he says holding the unrighteous. It's the same word as Jude 6 he's already used for holding and keeping the angels in chains of darkness. So just as criminals are kept in custody to await their sentencing and execution, so the lawless and the unrighteous are held by God to await the proper time of final punishment. The line not only rejects the heretical apostate's denial of final judgment, meaning it confirms final judgment, it also works to assure the Christian that the oppressive response of the ungodly we face as we live in the present world will be met with a proper just response by God in the future. So we will be rescued from their oppression while they become oppressed by divine punishment. That's just a simple syllogism to summarize. Let's see if I can get through the last 4 or 5 of these slides. So this is especially true of those who follow the corrupt desires of the flesh and despise authority. So verse 9b is a general idea of God's divine justice against the ungodly. But verse 10 then is designed to narrow that focus to the heretical apostates as a very specific group. That's what verse 10 is designed to do. It's not just making a statement about God doing this to all the people. It's a statement of him doing this against the heretical apostates. He's adapting language from Jude 7 and 8. Jude 7 speaks of flesh. But for Jude, it's another kind of flesh because it refers to the angels in human form, while Peter speaks of desire for flesh as in gratifying the sexual desires of the self. So Peter's word for desire is taken from Jude 6, not Jude 16, I don't think. I'm pretty sure that's supposed to be Jude 6. It might be Jude 16, I don't really remember. But Jude 8 speaks of defiling the flesh, while Peter speaks of those who literally go after flesh because of defiling, or here the NIV, corrupt desires. So he's getting this language from Jude, which Jude 8 speaks of those who revolt against lordship, while Peter speaks of those who disdain lordship, despise authority. Hey, I'm not really free unless I have all control. And I don't like the police because the police are a restraining force against me doing whatever I want. Stop being a jerk. Police are just men and women trying to get home at the end of the day. The only reason you think that they're oppressive is because your expectations are bad. Peter is hardly a slave to Jude's language and thought as he adapts and adopts his source, and in his quest to warn the church against the heretics who tempt them, says Gene Green. So the Greek, this is especially true, is malista dei. I like that phrase. It's the transition, could be roughly paraphrased. This judgment in verse 9 will come upon the unrighteous, but especially on the ones described here. So Peter's laying it on thick to make his point against the heretical apostates. His language is designed to do that. The notion of following is employed as it is in verse 2. It carries the notion of being devoted to something. You're devout, but unlike Lot and Noah, you're devout to the wrong thing. You're devout to the wrong God, even if that God is just yourself. In the Septuagint, it usually refers to false gods. In the New Testament, it can refer to false messiahs. See Luke 21:8. So Peter is saying that the heretical apostates have given their devotion to fulfilling their own greedy physical desires but nothing higher. Like the virtues and the godliness we're called to in the homily are the higher values for those devoted to God to strive towards. So we should be about a certain set of values. The people that have abandoned those values have abandoned God. These men will never bother striving for higher virtues because they aim for lower targets. They have the targets corrupt desires of the flesh, the heretical apostates' devotion to mere physical targets. It's very easy to hit a physical target. If all you want is sex, you can pretty much have that anytime in our culture. So the aim for the heretical apostates is sexual gratification. They're going to get that gratification, as Peter's implying here. Their desires are nothing more than mere human impulse. They're not under self-control. They don't persevere as the virtues in chapter 1 actually talk about. So they will not tell themselves no. Therefore, they are telling God no by default. If you're going to throw out God's laws and expectations, there's no line that you will not cross. The moment you're done telling God yes, you're starting to tell God no, and you're just going to keep crossing lines in your life. Despising authority, literally disdaining lordship, is the opposite of honor, which is essentially breaking the fifth commandment. Honor your mother and father, which is a summary of honoring the authorities over you that God has placed in your life. The first and most fundamental one that we're all born into is our household. Our moms and our dads have authority over us. It's a summary, the fifth commandment, of respecting all levels of society that God has set up. So disdaining lordship, dishonoring them. It reminds me of a line from Band of Brothers, if you've ever seen it, where I think it was actually David Schwimmer's character walks past somebody he's formerly trained that's now higher in rank than he is. And he walks by them and he says hello, but he doesn't salute. The guy stops him and he says, you have to salute. We don't salute the man, we salute the position. So you don't have to like me, you don't have to like the fact that I'm above you now, but you have to respect the authority of the position. And I think that's a good summary idea of what Peter's accusing the heretical apostates of. Because they've already shown disrespect to the apostolic authority, the ancient prophetic witness. So it's not surprising that Peter would speak of them in this way. They don't care for anybody's teaching or power but their own, which ultimately means they despise Jesus, who appointed the prophets, the apostles, and it's just especially these types of people who are going to face condemnatory judgment in the future, because it's really the authority of Jesus that they ultimately despise. And if they can do something about that, they can get over themselves. Our culture can get over itself and saying, you're not in control as much as you think. Freedom doesn't mean you can do whatever you want. But why on earth should that mean that you're not really free? You're free to make choices, but like everything else, you're free to make choices within certain boundaries. For God, in the garden, you're free to eat from any tree in this garden except that one. And we transgress that boundary, and we no longer get to go on with God's goodness the way that we did in the garden. God's working to restore that. And for those of us who claim that restoration, we've got to stop going on defying God in a society and a culture that keeps doing it. We've got to be the ones who stop.